The gunshot that killed Margaret Turner's husband echoed in her dreams every night, but it was her daughter's hunger cries that kept her awake in the scorching Nevada afternoon. The wagon had broken down 3 miles outside Silver Peak, and the August sun of 1883 beat down mercilessly on the canvas, covering as little Emma wailed with a desperation that tore through Margaret's heart like shattered glass. Margaret was 24 years old, widowed for 6 months, and watching her 2-year-old daughter slowly waste away from hunger. The last of their provisions had run out yesterday morning. She had given Emma the final drops of water an hour ago, and now the child's cries were becoming weaker, more pitiful. Margaret held her daughter against her chest, rocking back and forth in the disabled wagon, whispering promises she did not know if she could keep. The wheel had cracked on a rock, and Margaret lacked the strength or knowledge to fix it. Her husband Thomas had always handled such things. Thomas, who had been shot by claim jumpers in the California goldfields, leaving her alone with their baby and nothing but a broken dream. She had been trying to reach her sister in Carson City, but Silver Peak was as far as they had gotten. Through the heat shimmer, she saw a figure on horseback approaching from the direction of town. Margaret's throat was too dry to call out, and part of her wondered if she was hallucinating. But the hoofbeats grew louder, and soon a man dismounted near her wagon. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a storm brewing over the mountains. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat that had seen better days, and he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged to this harsh land. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair, "looks like you are in some trouble." Margaret tried to speak, but her voice came out as a rasp. Emma's crying filled the silence instead, and the man's expression shifted from concern to urgency. "When did you last eat?" he asked, stepping closer to the wagon. 2 days, Margaret managed. "My daughter, she needs food, water, please." The man did not hesitate. He returned to his horse and retrieved his saddlebags, pulling out a canteen and a cloth bundle. He climbed into the wagon with surprising gentleness and handed Margaret the canteen first. "Drink slowly," he instructed. "Not too much at once or you will be sick." Margaret obeyed, taking small sips of the blessed coolness before trying to give some to Emma. The child was too distraught to drink properly, and the water dribbled down her chin. The man watched for a moment, then spoke quietly. "May I?" he gestured to Emma. Margaret hesitated only a second before nodding. The stranger took Emma carefully into his arms, and something in his calm demeanor seemed to soothe the child. He held the canteen to her lips with practiced patience, letting her drink in tiny sips until she began to quiet. "Good girl," he murmured. "That's better now." He unwrapped the cloth bundle to reveal strips of dried beef and a small jar of milk he must have purchased in town. He tore the meat into tiny pieces, feeding them to Emma one at a time while Margaret watched in grateful amazement. The child ate ravenously, and color began to return to her pale cheeks. "Not too fast, little one," the man said gently. "Your belly needs to remember how this works." "I do not know how to thank you," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I have a little money." "Not much, but no," the man said firmly, shaking his head. "I will not take payment for basic human decency. But the food, the milk," I said. "No, madam." His tone was kind but unyielding. "I have enough. You and your daughter clearly do not." Emma had stopped crying entirely now, contentedly eating small bites of meat and drinking the milk. The man held her with a carefulness that spoke of either experience or natural tenderness. Margaret studied him more closely. He had strong features, weathered by sun and wind, and calloused hands that handled her daughter with surprising gentleness. There was something in his eyes, a deep sadness that he carried like an old wound. "I am Margaret Turner," she said finally. "This is Emma." "Barrett Vaughn," he replied, glancing up with a slight smile. "Pleasure to meet you both, though I wish it were under better circumstances. You live in Silver Peak." "I have a ranch about 10 miles north of town. Small operation, just me and a few head of cattle. I was coming back from selling some supplies when I saw your wagon." Emma had fallen asleep in his arms, exhausted from crying and finally sated with food. Barrett looked down at the child with an expression Margaret could not quite read. "You have a way with children," she observed. Something flickered across his face. "I had a daughter once. She would have been about this age now." The past tense told Margaret everything. "I am sorry. Fever took her and my wife 3 years back. Nothing the doctor could do." He said it simply, but the pain underneath was unmistakable. "That is why I could not ride past when I heard your little one crying." Margaret felt her heart constrict. They were both survivors of loss, struggling through this unforgiving land. "My husband died 6 months ago. Claimed jumpers shot him in California. I was trying to reach my sister in Carson City." Barrett handed Emma back to Margaret carefully, making sure not to wake her. "Your wagon wheel is badly cracked. It needs a replacement, not a repair. I can take you both into town if you like. There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Chen. She is a good woman, fair prices. I appreciate the offer, but I should stay with the wagon. Everything I own is here." "Madam, it will be dark in a few hours, and this country is not safe at night. Wolves, mountain lions, and worse." He paused. "Human worse, if you understand my meaning." Margaret did understand. A woman alone with a child was vulnerable in ways she tried not to think about. "What about my belongings?" "I will come back with a proper wagon tomorrow and haul yours into town for repairs. You have my word nothing will be touched." There was something in his eyes that made her believe him. She had learned to read men quickly after Thomas died, to spot the ones who saw her widowhood as an opportunity. Barrett Vaughn looked at her with only respect and concern. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn." "Barrett is fine." He helped her gather a few essential items, then lifted her down from the wagon with careful strength. Margaret held Emma while Barrett fashioned a sling from his bedroll so she could carry the child more easily. Then he mounted his horse and reached down to pull Margaret up behind him. It was awkward at first, sitting sideways on the horse's rump with Emma between them, but Barrett rode slowly and steadily, keeping them secure. The journey into Silver Peak took less than an hour. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with wooden buildings that had survived the boom and bust of silver mining. Barrett guided his horse to a 2-story structure with a painted sign that read, "Chen's Boarding House." A Chinese woman in her 50s emerged as they dismounted. She took one look at Margaret and Emma and immediately began issuing instructions in accented but clear English. "Bring them inside, Barrett. They look half-starved. I will prepare food and draw a bath." "Thank you, Lynn," Barrett said warmly. "This is Mrs. Turner and her daughter Emma. They need a room for at least a few days." Mrs. Chen waved them inside, and Margaret found herself in a clean, simply furnished parlor. The Chinese woman disappeared into the back while Barrett helped Margaret settle into a chair. "Lin Chen is one of the finest people in this town," Barrett explained. "Her husband was a railroad worker who saved enough to buy this place. He passed 5 years ago, but she has kept it running herself." Mrs. Chen returned with tea and biscuits, which she pressed into Margaret's hands. "Eat slowly. Hot bath will be ready soon. You stay as long as you need." "I do have some money," Margaret said quickly. "I can pay." "We will work that out later," Mrs. Chen replied firmly. "First, you recover. Child needs mother strong." Emma was waking up, looking around with wide, curious eyes. Mrs. Chen smiled and offered her a biscuit, which the little girl took shyly. Barrett stood, hat in hand. I should let you rest. I will return tomorrow morning with a wagon to collect yours." "Wait," Margaret said, rising despite her exhaustion. "I truly do not know how to repay your kindness." "No repayment needed. I am just glad I came along when I did." He nodded to both women and headed for the door. Margaret watched him go, feeling an unexpected sense of loss as he disappeared into the street. Emma tugged at her skirt, and she pushed the feeling aside to focus on her daughter, Mrs. Chen led them upstairs to a small but immaculate room with a real bed and a window overlooking the street. True to her word, she had a bath prepared within minutes, and Margaret gratefully washed away days of trail dust while Emma splashed and played. Clean and fed, they both fell into the bed and slept more soundly than they had in months. Margaret woke to early morning sunlight and the sound of Emma babbling happily to herself. The simple joy on her daughter's face brought tears to Margaret's eyes. It had been so long since Emma had been anything but miserable and hungry. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen had breakfast waiting. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread, and coffee that tasted like heaven. Margaret ate slowly, savoring each bite while Emma made a delighted mess with her scrambled eggs. "Your husband, he was a good man?" Mrs. Chen asked gently. Margaret nodded. "He tried to provide for us. The gold fields just did not work out the way he hoped. Many men come west with dreams. Not all dreams come true." The older woman refilled Margaret's coffee. "But you are young, strong. You will make new life." Before Margaret could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Chen answered it and returned with Barrett, who looked freshly shaved and wore a clean shirt. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat. "I have a wagon outside whenever you are ready, Mrs. Turner." Margaret's heart gave an odd little skip at the sight of him. In the clear morning light, she could see him more clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the weathered kindness in his eyes, the breadth of his shoulders. He was a handsome man, she realized, though he seemed entirely unaware of it. "Let me get Emma ready," she said, rising quickly. They rode out to her broken wagon together, with Emma sitting contentedly on Barrett's lap, playing with the reins. The child had taken to him immediately, which surprised Margaret. Emma had been wary of most people since Thomas died. "She likes you," Margaret observed. Barrett smiled down at the little girl. "Children and horses, they can tell when someone means them no harm. They have better instincts than most adults." When they reached the wagon, Barrett made quick work of transferring Margaret's belongings to his wagon. She did not have much. Clothes, a few pots and pans, Thomas's watch, a Bible, and a wooden box containing her wedding photograph and some letters. "This is everything?" Barrett asked, not unkindly. "We lost most of it along the way, sold what we could for food and supplies." Margaret felt embarrassed by how little she had to show for her life. "My wife and I started with less," Barrett said quietly. "We built our ranch with our bare hands and determination. Possessions can be replaced. What matters is you and your daughter are alive and safe." He hitched her broken wagon to his and drove both back to town, delivering hers to the wheelwright with instructions for repair. Margaret tried again to discuss payment, and Barrett again refused. "I have money to cover it," he insisted. "Consider it an investment in being able to sleep at night." "You cannot keep paying for everything," Margaret protested. "Why not? I have more than I need and you need help. That is what neighbors do." "We are not neighbors. I am just passing through." Something in Barrett's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Where will you go when your wagon is fixed?" Margaret hesitated. The truth was she had been asking herself the same question. "To my sister in Carson City, I suppose. You know, if she is still there, if she has room for you both. I wrote to her months ago, but I have not received a reply. Mail is unreliable. So you might arrive and find she has moved on, or that she cannot take you in." Margaret felt defensive suddenly. What choice do I have? I cannot stay in Silver Peak indefinitely. I have no skills, no way to support myself and Emma. That is not entirely true, Barrett said carefully. Mrs. Chen mentioned she could use help at the boarding house, and the school is looking for a teacher, the last one left to get married. I am not trained as a teacher. Can you read and write, do figures? Yes, but then you are more qualified than half the town. Silver Peak is not fancy, Mrs. Turner. We take what we can get. Margaret looked at him suspiciously. Why do you care where I go or what I do? Barrett was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses with steady hands. I told myself after Sarah and little Rose died that I would never let myself care about anyone again. It hurt too much to lose them. But when I heard your daughter crying yesterday, something in me woke up that had been asleep for 3 years. I cannot explain it better than that. His honesty took her breath away. Margaret had grown accustomed to men who wanted something from her, who saw her as an object or an opportunity. Barrett's openness was startling and strangely moving. I do not know what to say, she whispered. You do not have to say anything. I am not asking for anything from you, Mrs. Turner. I just think maybe you came to Silver Peak for a reason, and maybe that reason is not just a broken wagon wheel. They rode in silence back to the boarding house, but it was a comfortable silence, full of possibility rather than awkwardness. Emma had fallen asleep against Barrett's chest, and Margaret noticed how naturally he adjusted his posture to keep her comfortable. Over the following days, Margaret found herself settling into Silver Peak in a way she had not expected. Mrs. Chen did indeed need help, and Margaret gladly worked in exchange for room and board. She cleaned rooms, helped with laundry, and assisted with meal preparation. Emma thrived in the stable environment, playing in the boarding house garden and charming all the guests. Barrett came by daily, always with some excuse, checking on the wagon repair, delivering fresh milk from his ranch, bringing Emma a carved wooden doll he had made. Margaret found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. One evening, after Emma was asleep, Margaret and Barrett sat on the boarding house porch in the cooling night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights. "Tell me about your ranch," Margaret said. Barrett leaned back in his chair. "It is not much to tell. 200 acres of decent grazing land, a sturdy house I built myself, a barn, and about 50 head of cattle. I do all right, not getting rich, but I am not starving either." "Do you ever get lonely out there by yourself?" "Every day," he admitted. "The silence used to be comforting. Now it just feels empty." Margaret understood that feeling intimately. "I keep expecting to turn around and see Thomas. Then I remember and the loss hits me all over again. Does it get easier? Some days. Other days it is as raw as the day it happened, but Emma keeps me going. She needs me, so I keep putting one foot in front of the other." Barrett turned to look at her directly. "You are stronger than you think, Margaret. Not many women could have survived what you have been through." The use of her first name sent a flutter through her chest. "You can call me Margaret if I can call you Barrett. I think we are past formalities at this point." "Barrett," she said, testing his name on her tongue. "Why are you being so kind to us? Please be honest." He took a long breath, choosing his words carefully. "When Sarah and Rose died, I thought my life was over in any way that mattered. I kept the ranch going because I did not know what else to do, but I was just going through motions. Then I heard Emma crying, and I saw you trying so hard to be brave for your daughter, and something in me came back to life. You remind me that there is still goodness in the world worth fighting for. That is a heavy burden to put on a stranger. You are not a stranger anymore. You are someone I care about, both of you." Margaret's breath caught. "Barrett, I am not ready for—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "I am not asking you to be. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I am a patient man, Margaret. I can wait. Wait for what? For you to see that maybe we could be good for each other. That maybe we both deserve a second chance at happiness. Margaret wanted to argue to protect herself from the possibility of more loss and pain. But looking into Barrett's honest eyes, she found she could not. Some small part of her, buried deep beneath grief and survival instinct, was already responding to him. I should go inside, she said finally. Emma will be up early, of course. Barrett stood and retrieved his hat. I will see you tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow. As autumn approached, Margaret's feelings for Barrett deepened despite her efforts to keep them in check. He was unfailingly kind, patient with Emma, and respectful of Margaret's boundaries. He never pushed for more than she was willing to give, but his steady presence became the cornerstone of her days. The school board approached Margaret about the teaching position, and after much internal debate, she accepted. The pay was modest but steady, and it would allow her to support herself and Emma independently. Barrett helped her prepare the one-room schoolhouse, repairing desks and whitewashing the walls. You will be a wonderful teacher, he assured her as they worked side by side. I hope so. I have never done anything like this before. You raised Emma. That is harder than teaching a classroom of children basic letters and numbers. Margaret laughed, surprising herself. It had been so long since she had felt light enough to laugh. Barrett's face lit up at the sound. You should do that more often, he said softly. Do what? Laugh. You have a beautiful laugh. She felt herself blushing and turned away to hide it. You are quite the charmer, Barrett Vaughn. I am just honest. Life is too short for anything else. The school term began in late September, and Margaret found she genuinely enjoyed teaching. The children ranged from 6 to 14, and while some were more challenging than others, they all responded to her patient guidance. Emma attended as well, sitting in the front row and absorbing everything like a tiny sponge. Barrett visited the schoolhouse regularly, usually with some practical excuse, but really just to see Margaret. The whole town began to notice, and Mrs. Chen teased Margaret about her cowboy suitor. He is a good man, the older woman said. Not many like him. You could do much worse. I am not looking to remarry, Margaret protested weakly. No one ever looks. It just happens when it is supposed to happen. One Saturday in October, Barrett invited Margaret and Emma to visit his ranch. Margaret hesitated, knowing that accepting meant something, but Emma's excited pleas won her over. The ride out to the ranch was pleasant, with autumn colors painting the landscape in golds and russets. Barrett's property was more impressive than his modest description suggested. The house was small but well built, with a covered porch and flower boxes that held the withered remains of summer blooms. Sarah planted those, Barrett said quietly, following Margaret's gaze. I keep meaning to plant new ones, but I never got around to it. What were her favorites? Wildflowers, mostly. She said fancy roses did not belong in rough country. Margaret smiled. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. You would have liked her. Barrett showed them around the property, introducing Emma to the gentlest of his horses and letting her help feed the chickens. The little girl was beside herself with joy, running and playing with more energy than Margaret had seen in months. This is good for her, Barrett observed. Children need space to run wild sometimes. We lived in Sacramento before Thomas decided to try the gold fields. Emma barely remembers having a yard to play in. She could have one here, Barrett said carefully. Both of you could. Margaret's heart raced. Barrett, I am not proposing. Not yet, anyway. I am just saying that my home could be your home if you ever wanted it to be. No pressure, no expectations, just an open invitation. Why me? Margaret asked, genuinely confused. You could have your choice of women in Silver Peak. Younger, prettier. Stop, Barrett interrupted firmly. You are beautiful, Margaret, though I suspect you do not realize it. But that is not why I care for you. I care because you are kind and strong and loving, because you put your daughter first even when it costs you. Because when you smile, it feels like the sun coming out after a long winter. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. I am afraid, she whispered. I lost Thomas so suddenly. What if I let myself love you and lose you too? Barrett stepped closer and gently took her hands. That is a risk we both take. I could lose you just as easily. But Margaret, is not having love at all better than having it and possibly losing it? I spent 3 years believing that was true, and I was miserable. Then I met you, and I realized I had been half dead all that time. You brought me back to life. I do not want to hurt you. Then do not. Take your time. Let yourself heal. Let me court you properly. And when you are ready, if you are ready, we will figure out the rest together. Margaret looked into his eyes and saw only sincerity and hope. Making a decision that felt terrifying and right in equal measure, she squeezed his hands. All right, she said. Court me, but slowly. As slow as you need, Barrett promised. He kept his word. Over the next few months, Barrett courted Margaret with old-fashioned care. He brought her flowers, walked her home from school, joined them for dinner at the boarding house, and sat with her on the porch talking about everything and nothing. He never pushed for more than she offered, respecting her boundaries even when she could see the longing in his eyes. Emma adored him, calling him Mr. B and begging to visit the ranch every weekend. Barrett doted on the child, bringing her small gifts and teaching her about horses and cattle. Watching them together made Margaret's heart ache with both joy and fear. Winter came to Nevada, cold and sharp. The schoolhouse was drafty, and Margaret worried constantly about keeping Emma warm. Barrett arrived one evening with thick blankets and a small stove he insisted on installing in their room. I cannot accept this, Margaret protested. It is too much. It is practical, Barrett countered. Emma needs to stay warm. Besides, I had it sitting unused in my barn. Mrs. Chen gave Margaret a knowing look. Unused in his barn, which means he bought it specifically for you. Just say thank you, dear. Margaret did, though she was flustered. Barrett was making it very hard not to fall completely in love with him. Christmas approached, and the town prepared for a community celebration. Barrett asked Margaret if he could spend the holiday with her and Emma, and she agreed. On Christmas Eve, he arrived at the boarding house with a small pine tree and a box of ornaments. I saved these from before, he explained quietly. Sarah made most of them. I thought maybe it was time they brightened someone's Christmas again. Margaret helped him set up the tree in the boarding house parlor, and Emma squealed with delight at the decorations. That evening, with Emma asleep and the candles glowing on the tree, Barrett gave Margaret a small wrapped package. This is too much, Margaret said, echoing her earlier protest. Just open it. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain. Margaret opened it to find it empty. I thought you might want to put a picture of Emma inside, Barrett explained. Or whoever you want. It is yours to fill however you choose. Margaret's hands trembled. Barrett, this is beautiful, but I do not have anything for you. Yes, you do. He reached out and gently cupped her face. Can I kiss you, Margaret? I have wanted to for months. She should have said no. It was too soon, too risky. But looking at Barrett's hopeful face, Margaret found herself nodding. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise rather than demand. When they pulled apart, Margaret was crying. Did I hurt you? Barrett asked, concerned. No, I just did not think I would ever feel this way again. I did not think I deserved to. You deserve everything good in this world, Barrett said fiercely. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Barrett Vaughn, are you proposing to me? Not yet, but soon if you will let me. Margaret laughed through her tears and kissed him again. The proposal came in March, as spring began to return to Nevada. Barrett took Margaret and Emma to a meadow on his property where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. While Emma chased butterflies, Barrett got down on one knee. "Margaret Turner, I love you. I love your daughter. I love the way you hum while you grade papers, and the way you always put others before yourself, and the way you have slowly let me into your guarded heart. Will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Emma and a husband to you? Will you build a life with me here in Silver Peak?" Margaret's vision blurred with tears. 6 months ago, she had been alone and desperate, watching her daughter starve. Now she stood in a field of wildflowers with a good man offering her a future full of love and possibility. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Barrett whooped with joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while Emma ran over to join the celebration. When he set Margaret down, he pulled a simple gold band from his pocket and slid it onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing I have left of her. I would be honored if you would wear it." "I will treasure it always," Margaret promised. They were married in May in Silver Peak's small church, with Mrs. Chen standing as Margaret's witness and the town wheelwright as Barrett's. Emma was flower girl, taking her job very seriously and scattering petals with great concentration. The whole town attended, celebrating the union of two people who had found each other when they both needed it most. Margaret moved to the ranch after the wedding, and Emma adapted instantly. She loved having animals around and space to run. Barrett was a devoted father figure, patient with Emma's endless questions and willing to play whatever game she invented. Margaret finished out the school term, then decided to take a year off to focus on her new family and home. She planted flowers in Sarah's old boxes, choosing wildflowers as a tribute. Barrett held her while she cried about it, understanding that loving him did not mean forgetting Thomas, just as his love for Margaret did not erase Sarah. "We are allowed to love again," he murmured into her hair. "The people we lost would want that for us." Summer passed in a haze of happiness. Margaret learned to run a ranch household, which was harder than teaching school but deeply satisfying. She and Barrett worked side by side, building their life together through daily choices and small acts of love. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching Emma play, Margaret turned to Barrett with news she had been holding for a week. "I am pregnant," she said simply. Barrett's eyes went wide. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I think the baby will come in February." He pulled her close and she felt his tears against her hair. "I thought I would never have this again. Another child. A family. We are your family, Barrett, Emma and I and this little one. We are all yours." "And I am yours," he promised, "for the rest of my days." The pregnancy was uneventful, for which Margaret was grateful. Barrett hovered and fretted, and Mrs. Chen came out to the ranch regularly to check on her. Emma was thrilled about becoming a big sister and talked to Margaret's growing belly constantly. In February of 1885, on a cold but clear night, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Barrett cried when he held his son for the first time, and Emma peered at her new brother with fascination. "What should we name him?" Margaret asked, exhausted but happy. Barrett looked at her seriously. "Would you mind if we named him Thomas, after your first husband? He gave you Emma and Emma led me to you. I would like to honor that." Margaret broke down sobbing, overwhelmed by Barrett's generosity of spirit. "That would be perfect. Thomas Barrett Vaughn." "Tommy," Emma declared, poking the baby's tiny hand. "I am going to call him Tommy." And so Tommy he became. The ranch house rang with the sound of children again, and Barrett and Margaret built their life day by day, season by season. Emma grew tall and strong, eventually taking over some of the teaching duties when Margaret returned to the schoolhouse part-time. Tommy was a boisterous child, all energy and curiosity, constantly getting into mischief that made Margaret laugh even as she scolded him. 2 years after Tommy, Margaret gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Sarah Rose and Catherine Ann. The house was chaotic and loud and full of love. Barrett thrived as a father and husband. He expanded the ranch gradually, hiring a few hands to help with the growing herd. Margaret's teaching income and his ranching profits meant they were comfortable, not wealthy but secure. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Barrett and Margaret stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Emma was 12 now, Tommy 8, and the twins 6. They were sunburned and dirty and utterly content. "You ever regret it?" Barrett asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going to your sister in Carson City?" Margaret leaned against him. "Not for a single moment. My wagon breaking down outside Silver Peak was the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, the second best. The best was you refusing to let me pay for that meat and milk. I could not take money from a desperate mother. It would not have been right. You gave me so much more than food that day, Barrett. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to keep going. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You gave me all the same things," he said, kissing the top of her head. "We saved each other. We did we not?" Emma called from the yard, needing help settling an argument between Tommy and the twins. Barrett went to mediate, his deep voice calm and patient. Margaret watched her family, her heart so full it almost hurt. She thought about that desperate afternoon nearly 11 years ago, when Emma's cries had echoed across the Nevada desert. She had been broken then, barely surviving, unsure if she could keep going. Barrett had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had been too tired to form, offering kindness without condition or expectation. That act of simple human decency had changed everything. It had given her time to heal, space to breathe, and eventually the courage to love again. Barrett had been patient through her grief, gentle with her fears, and steadfast in his devotion. He had loved Emma as his own from the beginning and given Margaret the family and home she had stopped believing she deserved. The ranch had prospered along with their family. They had added onto the house as needed, built a better barn, improved their herd. Silver Peak had grown too, and Margaret's school had expanded to 2 rooms with another teacher. Barrett served on the town council now, respected for his fairness and integrity. Life was not perfect. They had lost cattle to harsh winters and drought. Tommy had broken his arm falling from a tree. Emma sometimes grew moody and difficult as she approached young womanhood. The twins bickered constantly. Money was sometimes tight, and disagreements happened. But through it all, Margaret and Barrett faced everything together. They had built something real and lasting from the ashes of their losses, proving that second chances were possible, and that love could bloom even in the hardest of circumstances. As the sun set over the Nevada mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain of losing Thomas would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had honored his memory by surviving, by raising Emma, by choosing to live fully rather than merely exist. And Barrett, who had also known deep loss, had found his way back to life through love. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone: a family, a home, a legacy. The children came running up to the porch, demanding dinner. Margaret herded them inside while Barrett washed up at the pump. Through the kitchen window, she watched him pause to look at the sunset, and she knew he was thinking the same things she was: gratitude for what they had found, amazement at how their lives had intertwined, and hope for all the years still ahead. Later, after the children were fed and bathed and tucked into bed, Margaret and Barrett sat together in their room. She brushed out her hair while he removed his boots, comfortable in the quiet domesticity they had built. "I love you," Barrett said suddenly. "I know I say it often, but I want you to know I mean it every single time." "I know you do. And I love you too, Barrett Vaughn. You are the best man I have ever known. I am just a cowboy trying to do right by his family. You are so much more than that. You are the man who saw someone in need and helped without hesitation. You are the man who refused payment because it was the right thing to do. You are the man who courted me patiently when I was still healing. You are the man who loves my daughter as fiercely as you love your own children. You are everything good in this world." Barrett crossed to where she sat and knelt before her, taking her hands. "And you are the woman who was brave enough to accept help when you needed it, strong enough to rebuild your life from nothing, and trusting enough to let me love you. We are quite the pair, are we not? We certainly are." He kissed her hands, then her lips, then pulled her close. They sat together in the lamplight. Two people who had found each other when they most needed finding, who had built a life worth living through love and dedication and faith in better days. Outside, Nevada stars blazed in the vast night sky, the same stars that had witnessed Margaret's desperation and Barrett's kindness so many years before. The ranch was quiet except for the gentle sounds of horses in the barn and crickets in the grass. Inside the house, 4 children slept safely, unaware of how precarious their mother's situation had once been or how a stranger's generosity had changed all their lives. Margaret and Barrett eventually climbed into bed, fitting together as naturally as they had learned to over the years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, as all tomorrows did. But they would face it together, partners in every sense of the word, committed to the family and life they had built. As Margaret drifted off to sleep, her last thought was one of gratitude. For broken wagon wheels that forced her to stop in the right place at the right time. For a cowboy with a kind heart who had heard a child crying and could not ride past. For the decision to stay in Silver Peak instead of moving on. For second chances and new beginnings and love that healed old wounds. Barrett's arm tightened around her waist, and she felt his lips press against her shoulder in a gentle kiss. She smiled into the darkness, utterly content. The story that had begun with desperation and hunger had transformed into one of abundance and love. Margaret Turner Vaughn had everything she needed: a home, a family, a purpose, and a partner who loved her unconditionally. It was more than enough. It was everything. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. The children grew and changed, each developing distinct personalities. Emma at 16 was thoughtful and serious, helping Margaret teach the younger students and dreaming of becoming a real teacher herself someday. Tommy at 12 was all energy and mischief, always finding new ways to test his parents' patience while charming them with his infectious grin. Sarah Rose and Catherine Ann at 10 were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and conspiring together constantly. Barrett's hair gained threads of silver at the temples, and Margaret found laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. They wore their age well, comfortable in their own skin and with each other. The ranch continued to prosper. Barrett had become known throughout the region for raising quality cattle, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase his stock. Margaret's reputation as an excellent teacher spread similarly, and families moved to Silver Peak specifically so their children could attend her school. They added another room onto the house when Emma turned 17 and announced she was courting young Daniel Morrison, the blacksmith's son. Barrett was predictably protective, but Margaret reminded him that Emma was sensible and that they had raised her well. "She is too young," Barrett grumbled. "I was younger when I married Thomas," Margaret pointed out, and I was Emma's age when we got engaged. That is different." "How?" "Because she is my daughter." Margaret laughed and kissed his cheek. "She is a smart young woman who knows her own mind. Trust her, Barrett. Trust what we taught her." Emma and Daniel married when she was 19, in the same church where Margaret and Barrett had exchanged vows. The young couple settled in Silver Peak, with Emma taking over the school entirely as Margaret finally retired to focus on the ranch and her younger children. Tommy at 15 announced he wanted to be a rancher like his father, which filled Barrett with quiet pride. The boy had a natural talent with horses and cattle, and Barrett began teaching him everything about running the operation. The twins remained inseparable, both declaring they wanted to be nurses after helping care for a neighbor who fell ill. Margaret and Barrett supported their ambitions, setting aside money to send them to nursing school in Carson City when the time came. On a warm evening in June of 1895, Barrett and Margaret celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party attended by most of Silver Peak. Their home rang with laughter and music, filled with friends and family and the community they had helped build. Emma was there with Daniel and their infant son, Barrett's first grandchild. Tommy danced with several young women from town, oblivious to his parents' amused observation. The twins served cake and gossiped with their friends. Mrs. Chen, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack, raised a toast. To Barrett and Margaret Vaughn, two people who found each other when they both needed finding and built something beautiful from broken pieces. May they have 20 more years of happiness. "Hear, hear," the crowd chorused. Later, when the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Margaret and Barrett walked out to their porch. The moon was full and bright, illuminating their land in silver light. 20 years, Barrett mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday you rode into Silver Peak on that broken wagon. Other times it feels like you have always been here. "I cannot even remember what my life was like before you," Margaret admitted. "I mean, I remember the facts of it, but I cannot recall what it felt like. This is my life now, and it is everything I could have wanted." "Do you ever think about how easily we might have missed each other? If I had ridden into town an hour earlier or later, if someone else had found you first, if your wagon had broken down somewhere else entirely?" "I try not to think about it. It frightens me, how much we owe to chance and timing." "Maybe it was not chance," Barrett suggested. "Maybe it was meant to be. Maybe we were always supposed to find each other." "I like that idea better," Margaret agreed, leaning against him. "Meant to be sounds much better than random luck." "Everything I have, everything I am now, started the day I heard Emma crying and decided to see what was wrong. Best decision I ever made. The best decision I ever made was trusting you when you said you would help. I had stopped trusting anyone by that point, but something about you felt safe. Because I was safe, because you were safe, because we recognized something in each other even then. Two people who had loved and lost and were trying to survive." Margaret turned to face him fully. "We did more than survive, Barrett. We thrived. Look at what we built together." He cupped her face gently. "I look at it every day and thank God for broken wagon wheels and hungry children and every twist of fate that brought you to me." They kissed under the Nevada stars. Two people who had learned that endings could become beginnings, that loss could transform into love, and that the darkest moments sometimes led to the brightest futures. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. In town, Emma tucked her own child into bed, continuing the legacy of love and family her mother and stepfather had built. Across the ranch, cattle grazed contentedly and horses dozed in the barn. Everything was as it should be. Everything was exactly right. Margaret Turner Vaughn, who had once been desperate and alone, now stood surrounded by abundance. She had a partner who loved her unconditionally, children who thrived, a grandchild to spoil, a community that respected her, and a home that welcomed all who entered. And it had all started because a cowboy heard a child crying and refused to ride past, because he offered food and drink to someone in need and refused payment, because he chose kindness over convenience, compassion over indifference. That single act of decency had rippled outward, changing lives, building families, creating futures. It had saved Margaret and Emma, healed Barrett's wounded heart, and brought forth children who would carry their legacy forward. As Margaret and Barrett finally went inside to bed, hand in hand as always, they carried with them the certainty that they had been blessed beyond measure. Not because their lives were easy or perfect, but because they had found each other and chosen to build something beautiful together. The story that began with hunger and tears had transformed into one of satisfaction and joy. The cowboy who gave freely had received far more than he gave. The widow who accepted help had found the strength to love again, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Love given freely, love received gratefully, love that grew and sustained and transformed everything it touched. They had found their happily ever after in the wild Nevada desert, two broken people who had become whole together. And in the morning, they would wake to another day of their beautiful, hard-won life, ready to face whatever came with the same partnership and devotion that had carried them through the past 20 years. It was enough. It was everything. It was perfect.